I watched my husband board his private jet with another woman while I doubled over in pain, 7 months pregnant with his twins. He didn't even look back. But what happened next? That man lost everything he ever cared about. And honey, he deserved every bit of it. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, stick around. This story will remind you that karma doesn't miss an address. And before we start, hit that subscribe button, because you'll want to hear how this ends. Trust me, my name is Monique, and 5 years ago, I married a man the world saw as a king. Trevor Washington, self-made tech billionaire, Forbes cover boy, the man who could walk into a room and make everyone feel smaller just by existing. And me, I was the woman on his arm, the successful pediatric surgeon with the perfect smile, the perfect body, the perfect life. At least that's what the magazines said. That's what our Christmas cards showed. That's what I told myself every single night when I went to bed next to a man who felt like a stranger. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I chose to ignore. The late nights that turned into weekends away. The phone calls he'd take in another room. The way he stopped asking about my day, about my patients, about anything that mattered to me. But when you're standing in the middle of your life, wearing designer clothes, in a 10,000 square foot mansion, it's easy to convince yourself that everything is fine. It's easy to say, he's just busy. He's building an empire. This is what success looks like. I got pregnant with twins 4 months into my 7th year of knowing Trevor. 5 years into our marriage. High risk from the start. My doctor told me I needed to reduce stress, cut back on work hours, and rest as much as possible. I did everything right. I ate organic. I did prenatal yoga. I read every book. But the one thing I couldn't control was the growing distance between me and my husband. The one thing I couldn't fix was the way he looked at me like I was an inconvenience instead of the woman carrying his children. Then I found the receipts, hotel suites in cities he never mentioned visiting, jewelry I never received, restaurants we never went to together. And when I dug a little deeper, because let's be honest, every woman knows how to become an investigator when her gut is screaming at her, I found her. Bianca Rodriguez, 26 years old, Instagram influencer, the kind of woman who posted bikini photos with captions about manifestation and living your best life. And there she was, in the background of photos, wearing my jewelry, sitting in restaurants I recognized from the receipts, living a whole life with my husband. When I confronted Trevor, he didn't even have the decency to lie. He just shrugged, loosened his tie, and said, "You're always tired, Monique. You're always working or complaining about being pregnant. A man has needs," as if I was supposed to apologize for growing his children inside my body. As if I was supposed to say sorry for saving kids' lives at the hospital while he was out playing sugar daddy to a girl who couldn't spell entrepreneur without autocorrect. But I stayed. God help me, I stayed. Because I was 7 months pregnant with twins. Because I thought maybe when the babies came he'd change. Because leaving felt impossible when I could barely tie my own shoes without getting winded. So I stayed. And I watched my marriage become a ghost. And I told myself I'd deal with it after the twins were born. Then came that Tuesday morning in September. I woke up feeling off. Nothing specific, just this heaviness in my abdomen, this pressure that felt different from the usual pregnancy discomfort. Trevor was already dressed, packing a bag, moving through our bedroom like I wasn't even there. I asked him where he was going. "Miami," he said, not looking at me. "Business meeting." Back in 3 days. Something in my gut twisted, and it wasn't just the babies. I sat up, wincing at the sharp pain that shot through my lower back. "Trevor, I don't feel right. Can you maybe postpone? Just until I see my doctor this afternoon." He turned to me then, and the look on his face, I'll never forget it. Pure annoyance, like I was a child asking for something unreasonable. "Monique, you've been pregnant for 7 months. You never feel right. I can't put my life on hold every time you have a backache." He left 30 minutes later, and that feeling in my gut? It got worse. The pain intensified, sharp, stabbing, different. I called my sister Denise, told her something felt wrong. She told me to call Trevor, make him come back. But I knew he wouldn't. I knew he was already at the airfield. I knew she was with him, and something in me, some part of me that was done being invisible, done being dismissed, decided I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to watch him choose her over me one more time, so I could finally accept what my marriage had become. I drove to the private airfield where Trevor kept his jet. The whole drive, I was cramping, hard, but I kept going because I needed to know. I needed proof that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts were right. And when I pulled into that airfield and saw them standing on the tarmac next to that gleaming white jet, champagne glasses in hand, designer luggage being loaded by the crew, her wearing the diamond bracelet I thought he'd lost 6 months ago, I felt something inside me break. I got out of my car. Each step toward them felt like walking through concrete. The pain was radiating now, spreading across my entire stomach. But I kept moving. I called his name. Trevor. He turned, and the look on his face wasn't guilt. It wasn't shame. It was irritation, like I was a bill collector showing up at the wrong time. Bianca looked at me and actually smirked. This girl, this child, smirked at me while I stood there, 7 months pregnant, visibly in pain. "What are you doing here?" Trevor asked, and his voice was cold. Not concerned, not worried, just cold. I tried to speak, tried to tell him I was hurting, but the words got stuck because right then, the pain became unbearable. I felt something wet between my legs, looked down, blood, not spotting, blood. I gasped, reached for the car to steady myself, and my knees started to buckle. "Trevor, something's wrong." "The babies, please," I was begging now, and I'm not proud of it. But when you're terrified you're losing your children, pride disappears. He stood there for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, then looked at his watch. Actually looked at his watch. "Monique, stop being dramatic. You always do this. Every time I try to do anything, you create some crisis." Bianca laughed, actually laughed. Then she said something I'll hear for the rest of my life. "Maybe if you spent less time complaining and more time at the gym, he'd want to stay home." I collapsed. Right there on that tarmac, I went down. The pain was blinding, radiating through every nerve in my body. I was screaming, crying, begging for help. And Trevor, he looked at me one more time, shook his head like I was an embarrassment, and boarded that jet. The engines started. Bianca blew me a kiss, and they taxied down the runway while I bled on the ground, clutching my stomach, begging God not to take my babies. An airfield worker, a man whose name I later learned was Robert, called 911. He stayed with me, held my hand, told me help was coming. A complete stranger showed more care for me in 5 minutes than my husband had shown in months. The ambulance arrived as Trevor's jet lifted off into that perfect blue sky. I watched it disappear while paramedics loaded me onto a stretcher, started IVs, asked me questions I couldn't answer because all I could think was, he left me. He actually left me. At the hospital, everything became a blur of emergency rooms, doctors shouting orders, consent forms I signed with shaking hands, placental abruption, they said, life-threatening for me and the babies, emergency C-section, 30 weeks, too early. My sister Denise arrived just as they were wheeling me into surgery. I'll never forget her face when she realized Trevor wasn't there, wasn't coming. She held my hand and said, "I got you. You're not alone." But I felt alone. Even surrounded by doctors and nurses, and my sister, I felt completely alone. The twins survived, boy and girl, 3 pounds each, tiny, fragile, fighting for every breath in the NICU. Hope and justice, I named them later, because after everything, that's what I needed to believe in. The doctors said if I'd waited even 30 more minutes, we might have lost them both. 30 minutes, that's how close Trevor came to losing his children, because he was too busy sipping champagne at 30,000 feet with a woman who saw him as a wallet with a pulse. He didn't come back for 3 days. 3 days. His children were fighting for their lives in incubators, hooked up to machines. And he was in Miami, posting Instagram stories at beach clubs. When he finally walked into my hospital room, tanned and relaxed, he had the audacity to look confused. Why didn't anyone call me? How was I supposed to know it was serious? My sister, bless her, physically stood between us because she knew I was too weak to do what I wanted to do, which was throw every single thing in that room at his head. "You were unreachable," I said, my voice flat, emotionless. "Your phone was off. You were busy." He ran his hand through his hair, that gesture he always did when he was uncomfortable, and tried to explain, tried to justify, said I was always complaining, always exaggerating. How was he supposed to know this time was different? And that's when I realized something. I didn't love him anymore. Maybe I hadn't for a long time. But in that moment, looking at him make excuses while our children fought to breathe down the hall, whatever was left of my feelings for Trevor Washington died completely. The story leaked within 48 hours. Someone at the airfield, probably Robert, tipped off the media. And why wouldn't he? What he witnessed was monstrous. Tech billionaire abandons pregnant wife during medical emergency to vacation with Mistress, the headline screamed. Bianca's Instagram stories, the ones she'd posted from the jet with champagne, and that smug caption about being chosen, went viral. Not in the way she'd hoped. People were disgusted. The comments called her everything you can imagine, called Trevor worse. His company's stock dropped 40% in 1 week. Investors pulled out. Board members called emergency meetings. See, Trevor had built his entire brand on being a family man, a guy from nothing who made it big and stayed humble. Except he wasn't humble. He wasn't a family man. And when the world saw who he really was, they rejected him with the same cold efficiency he'd rejected me on that tarmac. I filed for divorce 2 weeks after getting out of the hospital. My lawyer was thrilled because Trevor had violated every morality clause in our prenuptial agreement. Adultery, abandonment, emotional cruelty, all documented, all proven. Security footage from the airfield, text messages between him and Bianca that my lawyer's investigator recovered. Messages where they laughed about me, called me names, planned their future together once he dealt with the pregnancy situation. That's what he called his children, a situation. The divorce took 8 months. 8 months of lawyers and depositions, and Trevor trying to paint me as vindictive, as a woman scorned who was exaggerating everything. But facts don't care about narratives. Medical records don't lie. And when the judge saw everything, when she read those text messages and watched that security footage, she awarded me 70% of everything. The house, the investments, the offshore accounts Trevor thought I didn't know about. He walked away with 30% of the empire he'd built, and even that felt generous. But the money wasn't the real punishment. The real punishment was watching everything else fall apart. His friends disappeared. People who'd kissed his ring for years suddenly didn't return his calls. He got removed from charity boards, kicked out of his country club. His own parents sided with me, called him a disgrace to the family name. His brother, the one person who'd always defended him, gave an interview saying he was ashamed to be related to Trevor. And Bianca? She sold her story to the tabloids for $200,000. Detailed everything. Their affair, his plans to leave me after the babies were born. Private conversations where he called me boring and old. Then she posted photos with a new man, some 23-year-old athlete, with a caption about upgrading. She sent Trevor one final text that somehow got leaked too. "You're broke and boring now, good luck." Even the mistress didn't want him once the money and status were gone. Trevor spiraled, lost more weight than was healthy, started drinking, got into a public altercation at a restaurant that ended up on TMZ. Tried to launch a comeback with a new startup, but no investors would touch him. His reputation was radioactive. The man who once had the world at his feet couldn't get a meeting with a small-time venture capitalist. He moved from our mansion to a modest two-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood he used to call where unsuccessful people live. The twins thrived despite everything. Hope and Justice came home from the NICU after 6 weeks, small but strong, fighters, like their mother. They're 2 years old now, hitting every milestone, bringing more joy into my life than I knew was possible. Trevor sees them twice a month under supervised visitation because the court deemed him emotionally unstable during the custody hearing. Twice a month, for 2 hours, in a facility with a social worker present. That's what he gets. That's what he earned. I went back to work after my maternity leave. Started a foundation for women experiencing pregnancy complications, especially those without support systems. Bought my own house, smaller than the mansion, but filled with light and love and laughter. Started dating again, nothing serious, just remembering what it feels like to be seen, to be valued, to be chosen. I'm happy, genuinely, completely happy in a way I never was with Trevor. Last month was the twins' second birthday party. I invited Trevor because despite everything, they deserve to know their father, and I won't be the person who takes that from them. He showed up with a gift he clearly grabbed at a drugstore on the way over, tried to make small talk, apologized again, like he'd been doing since the divorce finalized, said he made mistakes, that he was young and stupid, that he'd change if I gave him another chance. I looked at this man, this stranger wearing my ex-husband's face, and felt nothing. Not anger, not hurt, not even pity. Just nothing. "Trevor," I said, watching my babies play with their cousins in my backyard, "I don't hate you. I don't think about you enough to hate you." And I meant it. He'd become irrelevant to my life, a footnote in my story, a lesson I'd learned and moved past. His face crumbled when I said that. I think he'd been holding on to the idea that I still cared, that my anger meant he still mattered to me. But indifference, that was worse than any rage I could have thrown it at him. He left early, before cake, and I didn't notice until someone asked where he went. People ask me if I ever regret marrying him. Honestly, because those 15 minutes on that airfield, bleeding and abandoned, taught me something invaluable. I was never the problem. My worth was never tied to his choices. And those 2 babies sleeping upstairs, they're proof that sometimes God rescues you by letting you fall. Trevor lost everything because he forgot something simple. When you have everything and you choose nothing, that's exactly what you end up with. Nothing. If this story spoke to you, if you've ever felt thrown away or invisible, do me a favor. Leave a comment below, sharing one thing you're proud of surviving. Let's build each other up, and hit that subscribe button, because I share real stories about real people every week. Remember, karma doesn't need your help, but it sure does enjoy an audience. I'm Monique, and I'll see you in the next one. He handed me divorce papers on our 5th anniversary, called me a disgrace in front of his entire family, said I'd never be good enough for the Wellington name. But what my billionaire husband didn't know? I had a gift for him too, one that would change everything, forever. If you've ever been underestimated, talked down to, or made to feel small by someone who was supposed to love you, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now, because by the end of this, you'll see why sometimes silence is the most powerful weapon. Now let me take you back to where it all started. I spent 3 hours getting ready that evening. 5 years, half a decade of marriage, and I still wanted to look perfect for him. I wore the emerald green dress because he once told me it brought out the warmth in my brown skin. I had my hair done at that expensive salon his mother recommended, even though the stylist never quite knew what to do with my natural curls. I wanted everything to be perfect. Our anniversary, our celebration. The restaurant was one of those places where you need a reservation 6 months in advance. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths so crisp they could cut you, and waiters who moved like ghosts. When I walked into the private dining room, my smile was genuine. I was ready to celebrate us, ready to toast to 5 years and hopefully many more. But the moment I saw his face, I knew something was wrong. He didn't stand when I entered, didn't smile, His jaw was set in that way that meant he'd already made up his mind about something. And then I noticed them. His mother, sitting there with her lips pressed thin. His sister, looking at me with something between pity and satisfaction. And Robert, his business partner, looking distinctly uncomfortable. This wasn't a celebration. This was an ambush. I sat down anyway, folded my hands in my lap, like I'd been taught. Like a good wife, like the woman they'd spent 5 years trying to mold me into. My husband cleared his throat. No champagne, no flowers, no anniversary gift. Just that look I'd seen so many times before, but had convinced myself didn't mean what I knew it meant. I think we need to talk about the reality of our situation, he said. Not hello, not happy anniversary, just business, cold, calculated. His mother jumped in before I could respond. Honey, you have to understand. The Wellington name carries a certain weight, a certain expectation. She said it so sweetly, like poison, wrapped in honey. I knew what was coming. I'd known for months, really, maybe years, but knowing doesn't make it hurt less when it finally happens. My husband slid an envelope across the table. Thick, official. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. Divorce papers, he said, like he was discussing a business merger. I think it's best for both of us. You have to admit, this hasn't worked out the way either of us hoped. The way either of us hoped. As if I'd been the disappointment. As if I'd been the one who changed, who became someone else. His sister spoke up then, her voice dripping with false concern. We all tried, honey. We really did. But you just never quite fit in, did you? It's not your fault. You just come from such a different world. A different world. That's what they called it. Like being black was a different planet. Like growing up in a regular neighborhood with a single mother who worked 2 jobs was something shameful. Like not having generational wealth made me less than human. But it was my husband's next words that did it. The words that made everything that came after feel justified. You've been a disgrace to this family from day one, he said. Quiet, calm, matter of fact. I don't know what I was thinking. I got caught up in something, I don't know, exotic, different. But this isn't working. You're not working. You never will. A disgrace. I sat there, feeling every eye in that room on me, waiting for me to cry, to beg, to fall apart the way they expected. His mother nodded along. You'll be well taken care of course. The prenup ensures that. A reasonable settlement. Enough to restart your life somewhere else, away from them, out of sight, erased. Robert, the business partner, wouldn't even look at me. This man I'd sat across from at dozens of dinners, who I'd made small talk with at countless charity events. He just studied his water glass like it held the secrets of the universe. My husband pushed the envelope closer. Sign them. Let's not drag this out. I've already made other arrangements. The secretary, the blonde with the high-pitched laugh, who looked at him like he hung the moon. I'd known about her for 8 months, seen the late-night texts he thought he was hiding, smelled her perfume on his shirts. I'd known, and I'd said nothing, because I'd been waiting, planning, building. I looked at that envelope, at his smug face, at his family's barely concealed relief, and I smiled. I have something for you too, I said, my voice steady, calm. An anniversary gift, since we're exchanging presents. I reached into my purse and pulled out my own envelope, thicker than his, heavier. The confusion on his face was almost worth everything by itself. Let me back up, because you need to understand how we got here, how a man looks at his wife of 5 years and calls her a disgrace without a second thought. We met 6 years ago. I was working as a financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm. Good at my job. Excellent, actually. I had a gift for seeing patterns in markets, for understanding the flow of money in ways that most people couldn't. I was on track to make partner by 30. He came in as a client, tall, handsome, confident in that way that men with money always are. He pursued me like I was the only woman in the world. Flowers every day, surprise lunch deliveries, weekend trips to wine country. He made me feel like a queen. The red flags were there. I see that now. The way he always chose my outfits when we went out. How he'd introduce me as my analyst instead of by my name. The way he'd steer conversations away when I talked about work. But I was young and flattered, and honestly, a little blinded by the lifestyle he offered. We got married after 8 months. Quick, too quick. His family showed up to the wedding with smiles that never reached their eyes. His mother took one look at me in my wedding dress and said, "How quaint." My own mother squeezed my hand and whispered, "You sure about this, baby?" I should have listened. The first year was okay. Not great, but okay. He wanted me to quit my job. "Wellington wives don't work," his mother said. "It's tacky." So I quit. Gave up the career I'd built, the partnership I was promised. All because he said he wanted to take care of me. Take care of me, like I was a pet. Something to be fed and groomed and showed off. By year 2, I was invisible. Not a wife. An accessory. Something pretty to stand next to him at charity galas. Something to nod and smile when his business associates spoke. I wasn't allowed opinions. Wasn't allowed to be smart. God forbid I corrected someone about financial markets at a dinner party. His hand would tighten on my arm, and later he'd tell me I'd embarrassed him. His family was worse. Every holiday felt like an inspection I was failing. My clothes were wrong. My hair was wrong. The way I spoke was wrong. Too urban, his sister said once. I asked her what that meant. She just smiled and changed the subject. I was lonely, more lonely than I'd ever been in my life. I'd lost touch with my friends, my old colleagues, my own family, because visits home were inconvenient and not really necessary. I lived in a mansion and felt like I was suffocating. But 2 years in, something changed. His company hit a rough patch, bad investments, worse management. He was hemorrhaging money, and his pride wouldn't let him admit it. I watched him come home angrier each night. Watched him drink more, snap more, and then, mysteriously, an investor appeared, anonymous, deep pockets, saved his company from bankruptcy. He strutted around for months after that, taking credit for turning things around. His genius, his business acumen. He never asked who the investor was, never wondered why someone would bail out his failing company. He just took the money and took the credit. That was when I decided, when I realized that if I was going to survive this marriage, if I was going to survive him, I needed to be smart, strategic, patient. See, what my husband never knew, what he never bothered to ask about, was my grandmother. She raised me after my mother had to work those 2 jobs. My grandmother, who cleaned houses during the day and took real estate courses at night, who bought her first property at 40, who built an empire by the time she was 60, who left everything to me when she passed, just before I met my husband. I had money, real money, old money, in a way. Just not the kind that came with a pedigree and a family crest. It sat in a trust with my grandmother's lawyer, a sharp woman named Mrs. Patterson, who'd helped build my grandmother's empire and who'd promised to help me do the same. So while my husband thought I was going to book clubs and charity luncheons, I was meeting with Mrs. Patterson, learning, planning, building shell companies, creating investment portfolios, using my grandmother's money and my own knowledge of finance to quietly, carefully, strategically insert myself into my husband's business. Every major deal in the last 3 years, I was behind it. That commercial real estate investment that tripled in value. Me, the tech startup that got bought out for millions. Me, the mysterious investor who kept bailing him out. Me, always me. I bought shares through anonymous channels, used different company names, built up my stake slowly, carefully, until I owned more of Wellington Enterprises than anyone else. 60%, controlling interest, and he never knew. Because he never asked what I did with my days, never cared. I was just the wife, the disgrace, the pretty thing that didn't quite fit. But now, sitting at that anniversary dinner with divorce papers in front of me, it was time for him to know. I slid my envelope across the table. His confusion turned to annoyance as he opened it. I watched his face as he read. Confusion, more confusion. then understanding, then horror. What is this? His voice cracked. Corporate ownership records, I said calmly. I own 60% of Wellington Enterprises. Every major investment, every deal, every save from bankruptcy over the last 3 years, that was me. The mysterious investor, me, all me. The silence in that room was beautiful. His mother grabbed the papers from his hands, her face going pale. His sister's mouth dropped open. Robert, the business partner, suddenly looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. My husband's face went from white to red. That's impossible. This is fraud. This is, you couldn't. I could, I said, and I did. While you thought I was doing nothing, being nothing, I was building an empire inside your empire. Every financial report, every deal memo, every investment opportunity that came across your desk, I'd seen it first, analyzed it, decided if it was worth pursuing. And when you made bad decisions, which was often, I fixed them. Quietly, his sister found her voice. But how? You don't know anything about business. I smiled at her, that same sweet smile she'd given me countless times. I have an MBA, finished it online, while you all thought I was taking yoga classes. I worked in finance before I met your brother. If you remember, top of my class, on track for partner. I gave it all up to be a Wellington wife, but I never stopped being good at what I do. My husband was shaking now. The prenup. You signed a prenup. You get nothing. Oh, the prenup, I said, pulling out another document. You mean the prenup that Mrs. Patterson, my lawyer, looked over? The one that protects my assets, not yours? The one you were so eager to have me sign that you never actually read it carefully. That prenup, Mrs. Patterson. His mother remembered her from the wedding. That woman from your book club. My lawyer, I corrected. One of the best in the state. She made sure that prenup worked for me. And according to its terms, since all the major assets are actually mine, you get the settlement, not me. You. I pulled out another paper. There's a board meeting tomorrow. They'll be voting on new leadership for Wellington Enterprises. I have controlling interest. I have the votes. And you, my dear husband, will be out. He lunged across the table. Robert grabbed him. Security appeared in the doorway, summoned by a text I'd sent 5 minutes earlier. You can't do this, he screamed. I'll fight this. I'll destroy you. With what? I asked. Your company? I own it. Your family's money. They're about to cut you off to save themselves. Your reputation. Well, let's talk about that. I pulled out one more envelope. Thin, but devastating. These are for your secretary, the one waiting for you in the lobby. Copies of every text, every email, every receipt from every hotel room. Oh, and evidence of the 3 other affairs you thought you were hiding. I thought she deserved to know what she's getting into. His mother stood up. Please, we can work this out. There must be some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, I said, standing up as well. Your son called me a disgrace. To this family, to this name. But I built my own name long before I took yours. And I'll build an even better one after I leave it behind. I picked up the divorce papers, signed them right there. Clean. Final. You'll be hearing from my lawyers about the settlement details, about the restructuring of the company, about all of it. I placed my wedding ring on top of the corporate documents. 5 years, compressed into a circle of gold. Happy anniversary, I said. And I walked out. The months that followed were chaos. For them. For me, it was liberation. The company restructured, new leadership, better leadership. Without him at the helm, we tripled our revenue. Turns out, I was good at this, really good. His family tried to stay connected to the business. I cut them out. Clean, professional, legal. He tried to fight the divorce, tried to claim I'd deceived him. The judge laughed him out of court. Turns out, not asking your wife about her life isn't grounds for fraud. The secretary left him after reading those documents. His mother stopped taking his calls once she realized he couldn't help her maintain her lifestyle. His sister tried to befriend me on social media. I blocked her. Last I heard, he's working at a consulting firm, making decent money, but nothing like before, learning what it's like to build something from scratch, learning humility. And me, I'm thriving. I run my company openly now. My grandmother's empire merged with what I built. I invest in women-owned businesses, in minority entrepreneurs, in people who get underestimated the way I was. I reconnected with my mother, with my old friends, with myself. People ask me sometimes if I feel bad, if I regret what I did. The answer is no, not even a little. Because here's what I learned. They didn't underestimate me because I wasn't capable. They underestimated me because my power threatened everything they thought they were. Every accomplishment I could have claimed would have diminished the story they told themselves about who deserved success. So I let them underestimate me. I let them think I was nothing. And while they weren't looking, I became everything. My husband called me a disgrace. But the real disgrace was how he treated someone who loved him. How he made me small because he needed to feel big. How he never once asked who I was, or what I dreamed about, or what I was capable of. The gift I gave him wasn't revenge. It was truth. The truth that he never actually built anything on his own. That his success was borrowed. That the woman he called a disgrace was the only reason he ever succeeded at all. And sometimes, the truth is the most devastating gift you can give. They thought I was just a pretty face to parade around. They never asked what I was working on, what I was building, or who I really was. Sometimes people don't underestimate you because you're incapable. They underestimate you because your power threatens everything they pretend to be. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been counted out and came back stronger, drop a comment and tell me your story. Subscribe for more stories about people who turned their pain into power. And remember, never let someone's limited vision of you become your reality. You are not the disgrace. You are the empire they were too blind to see. I'll see you in the next one. They said I was lucky to marry a billionaire. Lucky. That's what they whispered when I walked down that aisle in my mother's vintage lace. But when his hand connected with my face in front of 300 guests, I realized luck had nothing to do with it. If you've ever felt powerless, if you've ever been told to stay quiet when everything in you screamed to speak, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button, because what happened next changed everything. And I mean everything. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened. I'm not the kind of woman who gets pushed around. I was raised by a grandmother who survived Jim Crow, a mother who put herself through nursing school with 3 kids, and a father who taught me that my voice matters. So when people ask me how I ended up marrying Thomas Whitmore, how I ended up standing at an altar with a man who would hit me in front of everyone we knew, I have to take them back to the beginning. Because the truth is, I didn't see it coming. Or maybe I did. And I just convinced myself I was strong enough to handle it. I met Thomas at a charity gala 2 years before our wedding. I was there representing the community center, where I worked as a social worker, trying to secure funding for our youth programs. He was there because men like him are always at these events, writing checks that mean nothing to their bank accounts, but everything to people like me. He was tall, handsome in that polished way that comes from expensive haircuts and tailored suits. When he walked up to me and asked about my work, I thought he was genuinely interested. Maybe he was at first, or maybe he just saw something he wanted to possess. The romance happened fast. Too fast, if I'm being honest. Dinners at restaurants I couldn't pronounce, weekend trips to his family's estate in the Hamptons, jewelry that cost more than my annual salary. My friends were excited for me. My mother was cautious. She kept asking me if I was happy, really happy, and I kept telling her yes, because I wanted it to be true. But there were signs, small ones, that I pushed to the back of my mind. The way he'd suggest I wear my hair straight instead of natural. How he'd buy me clothes and then seem disappointed when I didn't wear them. The jokes about my neighborhood, my family's grammar, the music I listened to. He called it teasing. I called it love adjusting to fit someone new. When he proposed, he did it at another gala, in front of all his important friends. The ring was stunning, 8 carats surrounded by diamonds, that caught every light. Everyone applauded. I said yes because saying no felt impossible with all those eyes on me, all those expectations already built. That should have been my first clue about who Thomas really was. He didn't ask me in private, in some intimate moment between just us. He asked me when refusing would have been a public humiliation. Control disguised as romance. The engagement period was 10 months of slowly losing myself. His mother, Catherine Whitmore, made it clear from day one that I wasn't what she'd envisioned for her son. She never said it directly. Of course, women like Catherine don't have to. It was in the way she'd touch my hair like it was a curious object, the suggestions about etiquette classes, the comments about how different I was from Thomas's ex-girlfriends. All of them had been white, blonde, from families whose names appeared in society pages. I was none of those things, and she wanted me to feel it in my bones. Thomas started changing too, or maybe he just stopped pretending. He wanted me to quit my job at the community center. He said it was beneath a Whitmore wife, that I should focus on charity work instead. Real charity work, he called it, as if helping kids in my own neighborhood wasn't real. He criticized my friends, said they were holding me back. He even suggested I stop visiting my family as often because their homes made him uncomfortable. And I started to comply, piece by piece, because I loved him. Or because I loved the idea of being loved by someone the world told me was a prize. The prenup negotiations were degrading. His lawyers treated me like a gold digger trying to steal from their precious client. Never mind that I'd never asked Thomas for anything, never even expected the proposal. They wanted me to sign away rights to everything, including any future earnings of my own. My lawyer told me not to sign, but Thomas said if I really loved him, I'd trust him. So I signed. But not before I had my lawyer add one clause that his team barely noticed. It stated that any form of abuse, physical or emotional, would void the entire agreement. Thomas laughed when I insisted on it, said I was being paranoid. He signed without reading. My best friend, Angela, begged me not to go through with the wedding. 2 weeks before the date, she came to my apartment and told me she'd seen Thomas at a hotel bar with one of my bridesmaids. She had photos. I confronted him, and he cried. Actually cried. Said it was a moment of weakness, that wedding stress was getting to him, that it would never happen again. He begged me to forgive him, said he couldn't live without me, and like a fool, I believed him. I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was admitting I'd wasted 2 years and lost parts of myself for nothing. The wedding day started wrong. I woke up in my childhood bedroom because Thomas insisted we spend the night before apart. Traditional, he called it. My grandmother came in early, sat on the edge of my bed, and held my hand. She didn't say much, just looked at me with those eyes that had seen everything. Finally, she said, "Baby, it's not too late to walk away. Pride heals faster than a broken spirit." I laughed it off, told her she was worrying over nothing. But her words stayed with me as I got dressed, as I let the makeup artist cover my face with foundation 3 shades too light before I stopped her and did it myself. At the church, Thomas was irritated before the ceremony even started. The flowers weren't right. The musicians were off schedule. My nephew was crying too loud. He snapped at the wedding planner, at his own mother, at me when I tried to calm him down. His eyes had this look I'd seen before, usually after he'd had too much to drink. Cold, calculating, mean. I stood in the bridal suite in my dress, my mother's vintage lace that had survived 40 years, and I almost didn't walk out. Almost. But then the music started, and my father was there offering his arm, and 300 people were waiting, and I went. The ceremony itself was beautiful, in that empty way expensive things can be. Thomas said his vows like he was reading a contract. I said mine and meant every word. which makes what happened next hurt even more. We were pronounced husband and wife. He kissed me, but it felt like a performance for the audience. And maybe that's all we ever were to him. A performance. The reception was at his family's estate, under white tents that probably cost more than most people's houses. His business associates dominated the guest list. My family and friends were scattered among tables in the back, literally and figuratively sidelined. I tried to enjoy myself, tried to be the glowing bride everyone expected. But Thomas was drinking heavily, and every glass made him more tense. He kept pulling me aside to criticize things. My laugh was too loud. I was spending too much time with my family. I needed to circulate with his important guests. Then came the speeches. His best man went first, with jokes that weren't funny. His mother gave a speech about legacy and maintaining standards that felt like a warning aimed at me. And then I did something I hadn't planned. I took the microphone. I wanted to thank my parents, my grandmother, everyone who'd supported me. I wanted to acknowledge where I came from, because Thomas and his family seemed desperate to erase it. I talked about growing up in West Baltimore, about my mother working double shifts so we could have what we needed, about my grandmother's strength and my father's integrity. I talked about the community center and the kids I worked with and how they'd taught me what real wealth looked like. The room was silent. My family was smiling. Thomas's guests looked uncomfortable, and Thomas looked furious. When I finished and handed back the microphone, he grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise and pulled me toward the house, away from everyone. I thought he was going to yell at me in private. But we didn't make it that far. Right there, between the tent and the house, in full view of at least 100 guests, he spun me around and asked me how dare I embarrass him like that. How dare I make his wedding about my ghetto family and their struggle stories. He said I was too urban, too much, that he'd made a mistake. I told him to lower his voice. That's when he hit me. His open palm across my left cheek, hard enough that my head snapped to the side and my grandmother's diamond earring flew off into the grass. The sound echoed, or maybe that was just in my head. For a second, everything stopped. The music kept playing, but the world went silent. I could feel 300 pairs of eyes on us. I could hear gasps, could sense phones being pulled out. I saw his father smirking from his table, like this was exactly what he'd expected from his son marrying beneath him. I saw his mother calculating how to spin this, already composing the story she'd tell her friends. And I saw my grandmother starting to stand up, my father moving toward us, my mother's hand covering her mouth. I saw Angela's face, that told you so expression mixed with rage. I felt the sting on my cheek, the heat spreading. I tasted blood from where my teeth had caught my inner lip. But more than any of that, I felt clarity. Pure, cold clarity. Thomas was already trying to recover. He reached for me, his face shifting from rage to panic, as he realized what he'd done in front of everyone. He started to apologize, to make excuses about stress and drinking, and not meaning it. His voice had that whining quality men get when they're caught and want to be forgiven without facing consequences. He was more worried about his image than my face. I stepped back from him. My hand went to my cheek, and I could feel it already swelling. The microphone was on the ground, where I'd dropped it when he grabbed me. I picked it up. My fingers were shaking, but my voice when I spoke was steady. Steadier than it had ever been. I told everyone to please stay seated because we weren't done celebrating yet. Thomas looked confused, scared. Good. I should have scared him from the beginning instead of letting him scare me. I started talking. I told the guests that marriage is built on honesty, so let's be honest. I told them about the 3 affairs Thomas had during our engagement. I named the women. 2 of them were sitting right there in bridesmaids' dresses, and the way their faces drained of color almost made me laugh. I told everyone about the business fraud investigation his lawyers had been quietly settling, about the investors he'd misled, about the shell companies his father had set up to hide assets. I'd hired a private investigator 3 months earlier, after Angela showed me those hotel photos. I knew who I was marrying. I just didn't know I'd have to expose him at my own wedding. Thomas lunged for me, tried to grab the microphone, but my cousins Marcus and Deshawn were already moving. They'd positioned themselves near me before I even picked up that microphone, because they knew me well enough to know I wasn't going down quiet. They blocked Thomas, and when he tried to push past them, Marcus just smiled and shook his head. Not today. I kept talking. I pulled out my phone and pulled up the text messages. Screenshots of Thomas telling one bridesmaid how much prettier she was than me, telling another how the wedding was just for show, how he'd keep them around after. I had the wedding planner connect my phone to the reception screens. Every text, every photo, blown up 20 feet high for everyone to see. His mother screamed at me to stop. His father looked like he was having a heart attack. His business partners were already walking toward the exits, phones to their ears, trying to distance themselves from the disaster. I told everyone that I'd filed for annulment that morning, that my lawyer, who was sitting right there at table 12, disguised as my mother's friend from church, had the papers ready, that the prenup Thomas made me sign had a clause about abuse voiding it, and guess what, sweetheart? You just triggered it in front of 300 witnesses. I told them I was keeping my name, my dignity, and every single cent he'd have to pay me for breach of contract and assault. Then I took off that 8-carat ring and dropped it into the nearest champagne glass. The splash was tiny, but everyone heard it. I walked off that estate in my mother's vintage lace dress, my father on one side and my grandmother on the other. I didn't look back, not once. The video went viral before I even made it home. Someone had live-streamed the whole thing, and by morning, it had 50 million views. The media tried to paint me as a scorned woman, a gold digger who'd planned this for money. But I controlled my narrative. I gave one interview, told my truth, and let my lawyer handle the rest. Thomas's company lost 40% of its value in a week. The fraud investigation became public. His board forced him to step down. His mother stopped appearing at society events. His father tried to pay me to sign an NDA, offered me $10 million to disappear quietly. I told him to keep his money and choke on it. 6 months later, I'm back at my community center. I started a foundation for women leaving abusive relationships, funded by the settlement I got from Thomas. Turns out, when you hit your wife at your own wedding in front of witnesses and it's all on video, judges aren't sympathetic to your wealth. I kept every dollar he owed me and put it to good use. People ask me if I regret marrying him. I regret not listening to the women who warned me. I regret losing months of my life trying to be someone I'm not. But I don't regret walking down that aisle, because walking away from it taught me something crucial. Your voice is your power. The moment I picked up that microphone and chose to speak instead of shrink, everything changed. Not just for me, but for every woman who saw that video and realized she didn't have to stay quiet either. My grandmother told me something after the wedding. She said the difference between being alone and being lonely is the difference between freedom and prison. With Thomas, I was lonely even when we were in the same room. Now I'm alone sometimes, but I'm free. And freedom feels like coming home to yourself after a long time away. If this story touched you, if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it. Hit that like button if you believe no one, and I mean no one, has the right to diminish you. Subscribe, because I'm not done telling stories that matter. And remember this, your voice is your power. The moment you use it, everything changes. Drop a comment telling me, what would you have done? I read every single one. Now go be great.